One of the most important considerations throughout any investigation into a sudden, violent or unexplained death is the relationship between the family and the police. Families will be considered partners in an investigation and must be treated appropriately, professionally, with respect and in accordance with their diverse needs. This principle must be reflected at all levels of the police service. Following the terrorist attacks in America on the 11th of September 2001, British police family liaison officers were deployed to New York. This was at the request of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
We had about 10 or more policemen, some of whom had literally packed their bags, that day and just got on a plane and been told to go. They were being assigned. Who, and this may still be the case, but we needed to get our heads around this. Who were part of the investigation.
200 desks on a floor times 100 floors times 2 buildings. How many desks are we talking about? I never saw a desk. Never saw a file cabinet, never saw a bookshelf, never saw a computer, never saw keypads, never saw anything that resembled humanity.
We had a huge number of victims here. We had the largest number of victims ever in a terrorist act. One of the issues we had is not all of them were, the bodies were not fully intact. And we have approximately 20,000 remains associated with those 3,000 souls.
Everybody in the world knew what happened, who did it, what was done, where it was done, how it was done. And so for us, it became a matter of identifying the dead.
So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
Today, the fire service is still missing 132 firemen. We're still missing some almost 1,100 people altogether, still missing. And many of those people will never be identified because of those fires that burned for almost 6 months. Three months to the day, on December 11th, about 11:30, the phone rang. It was the chief by the name of Paul. The minute I heard his voice, I knew. All he said was, Lee, we have John. I could see there was a flag over somebody. It was John. Out of the 2,749 people that were murdered, there's only 292 whole bodies. We were blessed. Jonathan was a whole body.
I've been doing disasters for 20 years, and I can tell you that it was different on 9/11.
Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
The primary role of a police family liaison officer is that of an investigator. The 4 primary objectives are to gather evidence and information from a family in a sensitive manner that contributes to and preserves the integrity of the police investigation, to provide a documented 2-way communication channel between the family and the police, which is recorded in a family liaison log or other auditable document, to foresee and manage the negative effects of the investigation and criminal justice process through the provision of timely information and practical support. Referrals are made to victim support and other agencies in accordance with the family's wishes.
There's still a school of thought that thinking joining family liaison is joining the nice police. And in fact, we're putting one of the most demanding of jobs and some of the most junior of officers. So our stall is set from the outset. If it's not for you, please say.
I think the basic principles of family liaison stay the same, whether it's mass disaster or the core business is obviously the families that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. The family liaison officers stick to the basic principles that they're taught on the course. Because again, we have a level of investigation, whether it's 52 murders at once or one murder. The information that's imparted to the families is very similar, and what changes is the level of investigation, maybe the length of the investigation. But again, it's providing that family with the information that they require.
The FLO is an investigator in any incident, whether it be a murder or mass disaster. And it is really the FLO's job, who is the person who's going to lead, get us the right clues, find the right pictures, find the chances of recovering their fingerprints, find the chance of recovering their DNA, and the unique information about an individual that will lead us to getting them identified successfully.
I guess to the credit of the Met and the United Kingdom is their Family Liaison Officer program. It was very, very important and very, very helpful to the City of New York during 9/11, in that there was points of contact in dealing with the families.
The role that's changed most and has improved and has shown itself to be so worthwhile is the role of the FLO, reaching out to the families, helping them, trying to minimise the trauma that they're suffering in this, giving them that primary personal point of contact with someone who has direct links in with the team and giving them the information that they need and the help that they need. That's where fantastic development. It's helped my job because I'm getting better, more reliable news information. I'm getting a conduit to pass specific bits of information back to families, but also I'm getting a group of people with skills that are such a valuable part of the team now.
I want the family liaison officer to be the single point of contact for that family, because that ensures that that family liaison officer knows where the investigation is, knows that my wishes or the Gold Command wishes. They also understand the availability of the Red Cross, care agencies, social service, and can take them all on board but deliver one single message to the family.
You do not need to be a counsellor to be a family liaison officer. All you need to know is that counselling facilities through the specialist support services are available. And I think part of the role of the FLO is facilitating this support, and perhaps not advising the families when to do this, but advising the families that it's there for them when they want to take advantage of that.
It's about being a compassionate professional with families. It's not about being a friend. You can be friendly, but you must remain that compassionate professional when you're working with families.
You're going to wander into a world of grief and pain, and you're going to have to deliver some hard messages. We are there as investigators. We care, we respect, we have sympathy. We are not social services.
One of the objectives of a family liaison officer is to contribute to a coordinated response to the needs of families, ensuring individuals are given information on support services and that referrals are made in accordance with their wishes.
It was very basic in Bali. The day I arrived, I think, was the 7th or 8th day after the incident, and everybody was celebrating because ice had finally arrived at the mortuary. So it was basic, and there were bodies still outside in temperatures of 33, 34 degrees at that stage.
In Bali, the families were going into the space where the bodies were being kept and were opening body bags and were searching them, and that's a real problem.
They found it very strange that we wanted to pour over the site and make sure that we reclaimed all the individual body parts.
The F&CO hadn't set up their rapid deployment teams at that stage. A lot of our victims from Bali were expats living in Singapore, living in Hong Kong. So the families were there and they had access to Bali a lot quicker than we did. So a lot of the family groups were already on the island wanting answers, wanting to know what had happened, wanting explanations, wanting to see people in charge.
My main thing was with the Foreign Office that they weren't prepared for this at all. And I felt very strongly that after 9/11, they should have been ready for something of this magnitude, but they just weren't. And trying to get through to them on the telephone after Pete was killed was torture.
We didn't offer the assistance to families that they needed, and that was that was probably the biggest thing that we recognised.
There is a requirement for organisations like the voluntary sector to assist, to supplement statutory service resource. And so since I've been in the voluntary sector working with the British Red Cross, I've seen part of my task to work with organisations like Disaster Action, to work with organisations like the Police Service to see how best the voluntary sector can fill and meet those needs.
There are a number of different layers of agency that we deal with. I mean, obviously, in the initial aftermath of an attack, our links with the police and if it's an incident abroad with the Foreign Office is crucial. We've worked with the Red Cross, we've worked with Disaster Action, we've worked with crews, both in terms of providing support through families in the immediate aftermath, but also more long-term in terms of facilitating support groups. We have sort of developed this expertise and which we're hoping to cascade through government.
I was responsible for coordinating government support for all the bereaved families after the attack on the World Trade Center. And I've had a similar but much less intensive responsibility in relation to the tsunami victims and also Bali. We've helped in each case with the organisation of the memorial services.
The travel and transport industry have trained their own special assistance and care teams. They support victims' families, survivors and persons affected in incidents involving their own organisations or partner agencies.
We realise, of course, that we're very new to this. There's lots of other responding agencies, and really one of our chief objectives, particularly for the next year, is to work with those other responding agencies. It's absolutely critical that we get to know them and their capabilities, and they get to know us and our capabilities in peacetime.
I train a team of volunteers. They can come from any area within the airline. There are various ranks from baggage handlers right through to fairly senior managers. They volunteer to come and look after families, crew families, families of those that were on board the aircraft, and indeed families of those that may be killed or injured on the ground.
Primarily, the incident care teams on London Underground work in support of the family liaison officers of the Metropolitan Police or the British Transport Police. Our prime role is to assist them with practical help. For example, transportation, accommodation, very basic humanitarian needs.
We haven't been so closely involved so early in a major disaster before. So we've got lots of lessons to learn. Some we've already learned, some will be a long way down, months ahead as we evaluate how we responded. We talk to other agencies, we talk to the police, and we talk to people who we helped. It will be important for victims to come back and tell us, yes, what you did was useful.
The Foreign and Commonwealth Office have developed rapid deployment teams. These are on standby to respond to the needs of British nationals involved in an incident overseas.
The rapid deployment team consists of people who are trained to work with families. They'll be going to visit survivors in hospital. They'll be checking out the morgues to see if anybody is there, checking around the hotels, anywhere where there may be British nationals who are involved, and those are the people that we have a responsibility for. The option is now available that if there is a major disaster overseas, then the DVI coordinator or his representative will deploy with the rapid deployment team and work with the head of post to determine whether they have the facilities to conduct DVI to the satisfaction of the coroner back in the UK.
Essentially, a coroner is an independent judicial officer who is charged with investigating unnatural deaths. We have an obligation to confirm the identity of the deceased and then to learn in the course of an inquest when, where and how that person died.
In mass fatality incidents, there are 2 senior investigating officers appointed. One undertakes the role of Senior Identification Manager.
A senior investigator, in his or her own right,
will undertake the investigation of identity as a separate entity to the investigation. How we deal with the families and getting people's loved ones identified and returned is crucial.
I know only too well, having sat with some of the families, the grief it causes when their loved ones aren't returned. They accept they've been taken by the wave or the bomb or the collapsed building or the flood or whatever, but not being able to get the body back, in most cases, just accentuates the distress. The job that I want you to do is to help find those primary identifiers. Then we can get the business of saying, well, yes, sadly, definitely your son, daughter, partner, lover, friend was involved, but also we found them and we can bring them back.
In the DVRI process, the 4 primary identifiers are odontology, fingerprints, DNA, and unique medical conditions such as a prosthesis or medical implants.
I will work very closely with the senior identification manager, and we will set up the criteria that we will accept. So we would look for a primary identifier, be that fingerprints, be it DNA, be it odontology. And I know one case in particular we were able to identify on a numbered implant or prosthesis.
The senior identification manager controls a vast amount of resources, and in pockets, to summarise it very simply, you have the Casualty Bureau, which is bringing information in, so people reporting, my husband got on the train, I've seen it on the television, or was due to be on that train. You've got the body recovery from the scene, then the post-mortems at the mortuary, where we gather information from those bodies, and then the FLOs, who are charged as investigators to go and work with the families and collect ante-mortem information, which we put to the post-mortem to create the identification. That then goes before a commission, who will then formally make an identification. This total process is known as DVI, or Disaster Victim Identification. It's internationally recognised, and there's 184 countries signed up to it around the world.
An identification commission is set up to examine all available evidence present and confirm the identity of the recovered bodies.
The only way the Commission can identify a body is through the presentation of sound scientific proof of that match of the samples collected by a family liaison officer matching the samples collected by a mortuary officer and an expert, a forensic odontologist or a DNA expert or a fingerprint expert, making the first match and saying, I believe that matches that, independent, verified by another expert.
Many families have asked, why is a post-mortem carried out when the cause of death is apparently obvious?
It's important sometimes to establish whether death might have occurred either before the incident or after it, for matters to do with insurance, life policies and so on. It can also be important, for example, in terrorist-type incidents, to gather evidence, for example, bomb fragments that can tell you something about the incident. Obviously, it can assist in identification to look at teeth and any surgical procedures that might be obvious. Toxicology is important to find poisons or any drugs that might be relevant to the cause of death, particularly in transportation incidents. And also to establish, perhaps if an entire family are involved as victims, the order of succession of death for probate purposes. There can be a lot of money at stake.
Pathologists have a lot of skills with what we call soft tissue, so muscles and sinews and organs and things like that. The anthropologists have fantastic amounts of skill with bone, and they are very, very valuable in explosive and destructive, high energy impacts and mass disasters, so plane crashes, train crashes, explosions, that sort.
Amy Mundorf was working for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City on the 11th of September 2001.
The site was being excavated at ground zero 24 hours a day, and the people who were doing the excavations would basically fill body bags with human remains. And it was very, very commingled. There would be hundreds of fragments in one bag, and sometimes pieces would be embedded into other pieces. I mean, you could have a chest cavity with a hand blown inside of it. There were pieces of muscle that were fused onto bone. It looked like they belonged together, but they didn't. They were just fused together. And then depending on what was present, if it was a hand, it went to fingerprint. If it was near the head, it went to x-ray and dental. So for 9 months, we were doing this process, and it changed over time drastically.
We make the assumption that every case is commingled, everything is possibly mixed together, and it's only when we can be sure that it isn't that it allows to unite it. And you know, the assumptions that things are linked is what leads to the problems. So we make the assumption they're not linked until we can prove the link and put them together.
There was such a sense of urgency to get these people through the process and get them ID'd as quick as possible that you always run the risk of missing information.
Failure to plan your ante-mortem harvest correctly may lead to delays in the identification process and be a cause of secondary trauma for the families concerned.
I think it's important with ante-mortem that you don't go on revisiting a family wanting fingerprints on one trip and then DNA swabs and so on. Plan your identification strategy and go hopefully once to them and collect what you need.
January of 2002, an entirely new DNA collection effort was launched to reach out to the families to try to capture DNA samples correctly so that we would have a better chance of making those IDs.
All you need is one proven wrong identification, and the whole stack of cards falls apart, because as soon as you admit that one identification is wrong, all of the other identifications for that same age, sex and age group become suspect. In fact, if you think about it, there must be at least one other one that's wrong. But the whole stack of cards begins to fall apart. All the work that's been done by the FLOs to help the families come to terms with their grief and their loss, suddenly something they thought they could rely on in terms of identification and burying the right body, suddenly all that falls apart.
As a family liaison officer, you must explore all avenues available to capture the ante-mortem information.
A lot of hospitals will often keep, for example, smear tests, which are on slides, will contain DNA. If you've had minor surgery and perhaps I think we had the nose wart that yielded DNA for us in the tsunami, that these things are in existence. And again, good investigation, go to the hospital, go to the keeper of the histology department, explain what you're there about with your authority and say, right, can we actually physically go and have a look and see if there's any of that sample left as a yield for DNA. And I'm very, very proud that eventually we managed to get samples for everyone involved in the tsunami. It took some time, and as a result of the learning curve, it took longer than I would have liked it to, but we got there.
It's most important to get across to the flows once they've obtained the AM data, the dental records, the fingerprints, the DNA. As soon as they put that into the system, they expect an identification to be made straight away. They must remember that there are a backlog of bodies. The PM has to be taken from the body so they can be matched up with their forms. It's important to get that across to the officers, otherwise they're ringing up the mortuary constantly.
I will send you specialist teams if you need light sources, if you need DNA experts, I will send them to you to assist. But I expect the FLOs to be working with the families to say, well, where are we going to find this? Come on, let's work together to find these pieces to put the jigsaw together.
With the tsunami, we had the Identification Commission literally sitting here in this courtroom. I chaired it, and we had quite a small commission on that occasion. We had our senior identification manager, our pathologist, and our police mortuary manager. And so every morning we would meet at 8 o'clock and look at the repatriations that day, look at what information we had about them and what information we still had to get. We really wanted to make sure that when there were repatriations back here, we could bring the body back, confirm that all the documentation was in order, and confirm continuity in transit, which is very important. And so we were able to open the inquest and release the body the same day that they arrived back at our mortuary in Fulham.
It's very important for families to know the details if they want to, but only if they want to, and that might be immediately, it might be in a month, it might be in 6 months or a year. You know, we have to maintain that pastoral link with the families, and that's very much the role of the FLOs, to be able to provide the bridge between the families and the pathologist.
One thing that we do make sure we do is to set up a procedure, usually with the assistance of family liaison and the senior identification manager, to make sure we ascertain families' wishes at the earliest possible stage regarding secondary remains. We find it's best perhaps to get some sort of documentary confirmation.
tsunami was particularly difficult because of the state of the bodies, which made visual identification virtually impossible. 1 in 10 was mistaken. After the DVI process, which was imposed as part of an international agreement, then it's become 1 in 1,000.
Because of the time limit between the death and the opportunity to view the bodies were in a lot worse state. So many viewings never took place at suggestions from us of the condition of the body.
There were police officers from other countries who didn't think we would be able to recover fingerprints given the state that the bodies had deteriorated to. And our forensic people showed that we could still recover fingerprints. We perhaps were a little bit slow, but fundamentally, once we got going, we were the best in the world.
There's still bodies out there and there's still people that are missing. Many of the bodies may well never be recovered. There may well be missing persons for many, many years afterwards. Until the records have been confirmed, the AM and PM data, they'll never know who the people are.
The tsunami generated unprecedented amounts of calls in the first 24 hours. We were limited by the amount of resources we had, both human and technology. We stood ourselves and dealt with it within the Metropolitan Police. So we were very, very hard pressed to try and cope with the workload.
Some families did actually view photographs which had to have their health warning on them. Where a body is just almost a skeleton, DNA and dental records is most important.
"20 seconds into pulling away from Edgware Road Station, 20 to 30 seconds, I've looked round, at which point he then looked up at me, looked down, and as he's looked down, he put his hand in the bag. With one very quick action, there was a massive white flash. It was so bright, it was unbelievable. With the flash, there was a big feel of pressure, like a real, it's hard to describe, but like a confined space pressure. And with that, it felt like the carriage expanded and come back in really quickly. As that happened, the force of the blast blew me through the carriage doors, bounced off the tunnel wall, and I'm now laying in the crawl space between the track and the tunnel. As I've hit the floor, another body come out with me with the explosion, and some people have been blown out of the train the other side. As I've hit the floor, one of the carriage doors come down, hit me quite high up and at an angle, and took both my legs off, one at the hip and one below, just sort of below my knee. As I'm laying there, my arms and hands are alight. They're just not massive flames, but just flickering. They went out, at which point I just freaked, screaming for help, just shouting, just hoping, it's one of those things where just trying to shout louder than the people in the carriage, because I didn't want to be in there. I wanted to try and get out. Because I'm laying on the floor, I can see under the train, I can see bodies and body parts just everywhere. At that point, I just resigned myself to the fact that I weren't going to get out. That's it. That was going to be the end. I didn't want to die in there. That was it. I didn't want to die amongst all that.
The overarching role of the Family Liaison Advisor within the Metropolitan Police Service is to provide operational support at strategic, tactical and practitioner levels.
As a Family Liaison Advisor, we are responsible for looking after the day-to-day management of family liaison in the MPS. That's from the coordinators down to the FLOs themselves. The input we have with the coordinators is purely to assist them with the supervision of their flows, passing on best practice to them, which will cascade down to their FLOs.
On the borough I was on, the family liaison coordinator, who was a detective inspector, had a good knowledge on what deployments I had and what my capability and what my experience was. Once I was deployed to Operation Theseus, we had a different family liaison coordinator who was specifically deployed to that job. And I don't think that was very clear to the DI on the borough about the fact that his responsibility had changed.
In the case of a mass fatality situation like 7/7, where we take resources, specialist resources from OCU commands, boroughs, the FLOs work for the SIM, and my plea to senior managers out there is let them work for the SIM.
Coordination will be different, especially in mass fatality, because we'll have a lot more coordinators involved. We'll have coordinators, say, at the Family Assistance Centre, to work with. We had 40 family liaison officers working with us there. We'll have coordinators at the mortuary, again working out identification timescales, meeting and greeting families prior to them getting there. We'll have coordinators actually out on the ground working with family liaison advisors and coordinators with the family liaison officers deployed.
My brother's best friend, Rory, wrote a fairly detailed letter to the police saying, you know, the family feel that in actual fact, you know, they haven't been helped particularly. Very shortly after that, Guy appeared. And Guy was just the sort of person that we needed because he knew what was going on, and he had a very, very good approach to my bewildered and desperately lost elderly parents.
Sometimes you're just not going to get on with the family, and it's not going to always be your fault. And I think if you get into a situation like that, where your prime responsibility as an investigator is to get that information from that family, if there's a breakdown in communication, OK, come back, talk to the SIO, talk to the FLC.
Consideration must be given to an exit strategy at the very early stages of any deployment. Every deployment will be unique, but natural points to make this may well include at the conclusion of an inquest or other court cases.
Exit strategies must be planned from the beginning. It's part of the deployment strategy. I mean, it's very, very, very difficult to exit a family that has lost a loved one. And in many circumstances, FLOs are not that good at it. But if you stick to your strategy at the start and follow that through, it's a balance. The family needs you probably more at the beginning and less as the investigation goes through.
Family liaison advisors in mass fatality incidents are deployed to a number of locations, and they work alongside the coordinators, providing assistance and advice to the coordinators as they manage the flow deployments. We also have officers who are part of the goal group, so information from the SIM can be passed via the FLAs to the officers involved in the operation.
Some of the locations where a family liaison advisor or coordinator may be deployed to are a survivor reception centre, hospitals receiving casualties, Central Casualty Bureau, the Major Incident Room, a Family and Friends Reception Centre, the mortuary, a humanitarian assistance centre, airports, overseas deployments, or to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office or Department for Culture, Media and Sport.
I grew up in a world where we were all taught to hide our feelings, and if there was a tragedy, whether it was personal, domestic, or involving others, you just got on with your job and you didn't let anything show. And I mean that's the post-war mentality, and I think that carried on infecting how the police and all the emergency services saw their role.
My whole career has been a rough and tumble type of career. Fought in Vietnam, extremely busy companies. My first company was a very busy engine company. That's where my sons got it from. Working in a rescue company in the city of New York, it was the busiest rescue company, Rescue 2 in Brooklyn. Nothing prepared me for this. This site here was a test on humanity. We have to be very conscious of what the results were of this, the psychological results of this. It's going to linger for many, many years. We've already seen it through suicides. We've seen it through divorce. We've seen it through drinking. We've seen it through drugs, spousal abuse.
The most valuable assets to any organisation are its staff. Recognising the need to provide support and assistance is key in all areas of humanitarian assistance work.
In support of all our FLOs, our FLCs and our FLAs, clearly we have the occupational health support. And that's a 24-hour support system, 24 hours, 365 days a year that you can seek help, assistance from occupational health. Certainly within family liaison, there is absolutely no stigma attached to that.
In the event of an accident for BMI, or for any accident that BMI possibly could be involved in, i.e. a Star Alliance partner or even a mutual aid carrier, We have quite comprehensive support programmes in place for our staff that work the accident. We have mental health professionals that are called in as part of our emergency call-out system. We provide a 24-hour telephone helpline for any member of staff, not just working the accident, but anybody working within BMI who may be affected.
We have occupational health available through a department in the UK. We also have an employee assistance programme, and we have a programme called TRIM, which is Trauma Risk Management. And most of our rapid deployment team members are trained in this trauma risk management, so they can look out for each other.
Well, the local authorities, of course, are encouraged now to develop their own crisis support team and to train in advance. Not all of them do, but we hope that they will be doing. But it really is, I think it's certainly HAG's view and others, that it's the local authority responsibility, and certainly the Civil Contingencies Act is very clear that as Category 1 responders, there is now a statutory duty to respond and to provide support. What we need to get through as well is that statutory duty can be best achieved by training and planning in advance.
And we've always had a role in supporting the emergency services, so we're very used to that, and I think it's now just moving into a new phase of which raises expectations around the role of local government and its local community leadership role, as well as its support to emergency services when there is a disaster of this sort.
One of the things we've done since 9/11 is involve the business community in our resilience planning, and clearly there's the importance for them to be able to cope with an attack that may damage their headquarters or their place of business, and they need to have fallbacks and planning about where they'd relocate to so that their business isn't destroyed.
Planning may well include entering into formal agreements with your partners at a local, national and even international level. Experience shows that this is best practice.
We're certainly within the UK, we're part of the UK Airlines Emergency Planning Group, and we have a mutual support programme, and of course on a day-to-day basis we're part of the Star Alliance. And all of our star partners have agreed contractually to provide assistance in the event of an accident.
We are learning by experience. So as I have said, with the response to the World Trade Center, with the response to Bali, with the response to the tsunami, and then with the London bombing, each time we see which are the organisations who most appropriately can be used, can provide a service over a sustained period of time, and whose volunteers have got the best skills for the job. And between us, the voluntary organisations have identified this and recognised this, so our plans get better and clearer each time we're part of the response.
We've got a very high level working group which involves other departments who have an interest, like health or the Home Office, also the Foreign Office and the police, but also at a sort of second tier level we work with a lot of agencies such as Victim Support and Disaster Action, who are very helpful in influencing our thinking about what it is that victims of disaster and their families really need from government.
Police claim they've disrupted what might have been the world's biggest terrorist plot. A group with suspected links to Al-Qaeda planned to blow up as many as 10 planes over the Atlantic, killing thousands of people.
On the 10th of August 2006, numerous flights departing London airports were disrupted due to a plot to commit mass murder on an unimaginable scale. The security threat level was raised to critical, with an attack expected imminently. This plot was foiled, but highlights the need for continued planning and exercising. Are you ready?
I hope you will have found this presentation useful in providing you with a snapshot of the difficult and emerging role of FLOs, whether you be a police officer or a key stakeholder outside of the police who help us in this role. I would like to thank you all for taking the time to place yourself as volunteers to undertake that role. It's clear to me as a senior officer that we could not maintain the confidence of communities and families at times of great difficulty that these tragic events bring without the dedication of people like yourself who carry out that role.